Hey guys, my name is Adrienne. I am making a video today to go over this really great cycle syncing guide that I created. I am a health and wellness coach and I work with people to help them to change their behaviors or to create new behaviors to try to get to where they want to be with their health and wellness goals. One of the ways that I do that is with cycle syncing. So we're going to get into it. I also have a podcast episode on my podcast, Anything Flows, where my sister and I went into depth on our personal experiences with cycle syncing and what we've gotten out of it, and started and also explained the 4 phases of the cycle and did that episode to kind of go along with this guide. So this guide, this video, and the podcast episode are all really great resources. So all the information is going to be in the description of this video so you guys can check it out. But today I kind of wanted to go through some of the things that I didn't go through in the podcast episode. So if you have the guide, you can follow along, or you can just watch this video and then download it after. So as far as I kind of wanted to start out with these statistics, I mentioned some of these in the podcast episode, and we'll get into what cycle syncing is and everything in a bit. But first, I really wanted to paint a picture of why cycle syncing is so important and how prevalent a lot of these hormone related or reproductive health related conditions are. And maybe just looking at this list, some of these they might affect your life too. You might have PCOS, you might have really bad experiences with your period, or know somebody who has maybe some of these autoimmune conditions, which women are more likely to have because of the imbalance that we're living in our day to day. So these are just some of the statistics, and I won't read them off, but you can definitely look and see that there are a lot of disparities. And in the guide, I have some reflection questions in here to get you into a good place and to figure out where you're at in your cycle syncing journey and what some of the important things are that you want to focus on. So first, just ask yourself, how do you currently feel about your menstrual cycle? And what are your patterns? Do you know how long it is, what your symptoms are, or any kind of irregularities or discomforts? Is there anything that you're concerned about with your health? Are you trying to be aware of your fertility so that way you could try to get pregnant? Are you experiencing really bad symptoms, even cramps and bloating and things like that you're trying to control? What are my current eating and exercise habits, and how do they make me feel physically and emotionally? I think this is a really good one to ask, because I think for a lot of women that I work with, they are conditioned and really made to believe that they need to be going all out all the time and never missing the gym and always eating restrictively and in a calorie deficit and staying away from certain foods. And that's not how I coach. That's not where I'm trying to lead you to. What I'm trying to do is help you to create a balance where you can enjoy what you're doing. You can enjoy the strength training. You can enjoy and honor the times of restoration that your body needs. So, what does your habit with exercise kind of look like there? And then also eating habits, of course. I feel like the biggest thing that I notice as a coach is that people aren't eating enough. That's really the biggest thing. And obviously, if you're working out a lot too, and you're not eating enough, that's just adding more stress to your body. And stress is a really big thing that I focus on. And I'll talk about the hormone cortisol and how that plays a role here. And ask yourself too, physically and emotionally, how are you feeling about your habits with exercise and eating? Do you feel like it's something that you can sustain and maintain, or is this something that you're worried about maintaining? Third question is, what is my current stress level and how do I manage it? Like I said earlier, cortisol is super important, and we don't want to be adding more stress to the body because we're already in a culture and in a society of high stress. And so we want to step away from that. But how do you manage it? Is exercise how you manage it? A lot of people would say yes, but exercise itself is a stressor. So is it really helping, or is it adding more stress? For me, really big ones are yoga and meditation and journaling, just really doing a lot of self-care with those. And I think that really helps to balance out the stressors I do have in my life. And sleep and rest are really important too. That's when your body is recovering and getting the recovery that it needs. And so if you're not doing that, you're keeping yourself in that stressed fight or flight place. Fourth question is, how can I create a supportive environment for myself during my menstrual cycle, including at home, at work, and in my relationships? So like, just take note of what kind of support you have right now. And if you don't feel like you do have that support, maybe something to consider is coaching. Like, that's a really important thing to focus on, is having relationships and having somebody to hold you accountable and to be in your corner and to guide you and to support you. And so, if you have people like that, that's amazing. And if maybe not, or if you need more support, reach out about coaching. The fifth question is, what resources or support do I currently have available to me, such as coaching, books, websites that can help me on my cycle syncing journey? Coaching is a great resource, but I think also you want to, and as a coach, I want you to develop your own accountability for yourself. And so maybe looking into books and websites, podcast episodes, and things like that, where you're absorbing knowledge and information that's relevant and applicable to you in your life. So think about all these questions and put yourself or just, see where you're at in this journey and what maybe some of your obstacles are. So that way you can problem solve and figure out what you need to really support this journey that you're about to embark on. So let's talk about what cycle syncing is. So really what it is, we're working with our body's natural rhythm and processes to optimize our health. The next slide, I'll talk about the different rhythms that our bodies have, the different rhythms that men have and that women have, and why we've been living kind of like separate from those rhythms and how that's really affected us in a negative way as women. And so by cycle syncing, that can really help to guide your performance pattern more efficiently when it comes to things like fitness, productivity, communication, and self-care. And I think it's also a more collaborative, grounding, anxiety reducing, and embracing of your feminine energy that I feel like we're conditioned to suppress and to hide almost. So, why isn't this something that we've been taught about? Like, why did we not know about, this 28-day cycle? I mean, we all know about that. We have, as women, we have a menstrual cycle, but I feel like as women, we only think about our period and maybe ovulation, but we don't really think about what's truly going on in our bodies throughout those 28 days, because it's not the same thing every single day. For men, as the next slide will show, for men, their hormones, they recycle, or that rhythm is repeated every single day, whereas for women, it's every 28 days. So, why weren't we taught about this and how like living not in accordance to that cycle and to that rhythm can affect us, and how not living there is putting us at a disadvantage? And a lot of it has to do with research, and some of these protocols that we're following are mainly done on men. Women only account for 39% of participants in exercise research. And if we are included in those studies, we're only studied for part of our cycle. And so obviously you'll learn about the different phases, and then maybe you'll be able to like see how that could be really misleading. Like if we're not getting the full picture about what our bodies need at the different times and what some of these exercise protocols, what their effects could be on women during different phases of their cycle, and how different that could be also compared to men. So I think the solution is just is really trying to redefine women's healthcare, and other things like time management and the concept of success as well from a female-centered perspective. And I think this is a really good place to start. So I mentioned that men and women have two different rhythms when it comes to their hormones. So I think most of us are familiar with the circadian rhythm, and that is, when you think about that, you think about the sun, and that's what helps us. It helps men and women to be alert in the morning, wake up in the morning, and be able to fall asleep at night. So that's very helpful for both men and women. For men specifically, that's how their hormones, that's the rhythm that their hormones are also on. So early in the day, hormones like testosterone will be highest, and then as the day goes on, it'll start to decrease, and then it'll just repeat again the next day, every single 24 hours. And that's how our society has kind of been like conditioned. I keep saying conditioned, but how our society has been structured in a way, because we follow men's 24-hour cycle. We have, a 9 to 5 work day, and it's very in accordance to how men's hormones function. Whereas women, our hormones don't do that. We don't get that same cycle every single day. Our hormones are on a 28-day biological clock. So this is really where those 4 phases of your menstrual cycle come into play, and why understanding how different they are and what's going on in each phase is really important. So that way you're doing what you can to support what's going on hormonally in each of those phases. And when you do that, and when you focus on improving what you can and optimizing what you can in that phase, it supports the next, and then the next, and then the whole cycle in general. So I think go back to those reflection questions and ask yourself, like, what are maybe some of your struggles that you're dealing with when it comes to not just your physical health, but how you choose to like define your success and your time management and your creativity, your communication. Like we'll learn all about that in this video. But I think that those questions are a good place to just like frame the conversation in your unique life. So let's get into the 4 main hormones for the menstrual cycle. So we'll start out with estrogen, and up here it says production. So the estrogen is produced by the ovaries, and also in small amounts by the adrenals and the fat cells. And the adrenals are glands that sit on top of our kidneys, and they produce other hormones like cortisol, which is our stress hormone. So that's why if you have extra body fat, sometimes men who have extra body fat can have a lot of estrogen in their system, because those fat cells produce estrogen. So that's just background information on where it comes from. What does it do though? The major roles of estrogen are to thicken the uterine lining in anticipation of pregnancy. And if that egg after ovulation is fertilized, you want to make sure that the uterine lining in the uterus is healthy for that egg to implant. So that's what estrogen is doing. It also protects against dementia, bone density loss, heart disease, and high blood pressure. So that's why sometimes women who are postmenopausal or in menopause have low bone density or osteoporosis and things like that, because they don't have a lot of estrogen. So use it to your advantage, when you are in your reproductive years, to take care of your bone health. Heart disease and high blood pressure are other things that estrogen protects against. When estrogen is out of balance, I think the biggest concern with estrogen is estrogen dominance, meaning that you have more estrogen compared to other hormones. It's out of balance, where estrogen is higher compared to others. So this can lead to irregular periods, PMS, fibroids, endometriosis, breast tenderness, weight gain, fatigue, insomnia, mood changes, and then decreased libido as well. So a lot of things can go wrong when you have too much estrogen. And we'll keep going. If you have questions, make sure to reach out or jot them down, and make sure that like you get those answered by me if I don't answer them here. But I'll make sure to cover as much as I can, and I know there is a lot to cover here. So with progesterone, that would be the next hormone out of the 4 during the menstrual cycle that we focus on. So progesterone is going to be produced after ovulation. Its main purpose is to continue to build up the uterine lining after ovulation. So estrogen is kind of before ovulation, and progesterone would be continuing to supply that tissue after ovulation. So if the egg isn't fertilized, if there is no possible pregnancy, then progesterone falls, and then that's when the lining of your uterus sheds through menstruation. So this also is what promotes relaxation, improves your sleep, enhances your mood. So that might be why you feel a little bit more lethargic or drowsy when you're in your luteal phase right before your period. So if progesterone is out of balance, this is usually where those PMS symptoms occur, and it's usually because of low estrogen. So progesterone. So high estrogen dominance is the concern with estrogen, but progesterone, it's usually that it's too low. So that is really where like a lot of the cramps, the bloating, and things like that are affecting women. So, and then moving into the follicle stimulating hormone, this one is going to be released by the pituitary gland, which is in the brain. And this is during your follicular phase. So right after your period, you're in your follicular phase. And what this does is it stimulates the ovarian follicles in your ovary to mature into eggs. So in your ovaries, you have millions and millions of follicles, and follicle stimulating hormone's job is to develop those follicles into a mature egg. So it takes 7 to 10 days during that follicular phase to do that. And then we have the luteinizing hormone. That hormone is going to rise right before or basically at ovulation. And that's what's going to cause that ovarian follicle, that egg, to rupture out of the ovary once it's mature, and it goes into the fallopian tube. So these kind of work together. So going back to follicle stimulating hormone, if it's out of balance, that can lead to infertility issues because you never have enough of that hormone to develop the follicle into a mature egg. And if there is no mature egg to be released, then you can't fertilize anything, and there's no way that you can get pregnant. So, and then with luteinizing hormone, if that one's out of balance, same thing. You might have infertility issues because that egg is never being ruptured out of the ovary, and it could also lead to issues like with PCOS. A few other hormones that I think are really important to talk about are progesterone. Testosterone. So testosterone, I feel like we associate that a lot with men. So with men, testosterone is going to be highest in the morning, like I said earlier, and it's going to decrease as the day goes on, and then that repeats every 24 hours. For women, we also produce testosterone in our ovaries and our adrenal glands, however, in much lower doses than men. But this is really only going to surge right before ovulation and right after ovulation. So what this is doing is helping us to increase our sex drive, our stamina, our endurance, all for the purpose of trying to get us pregnant, basically. And it's also going to be very helpful for maintaining and building bone health, muscle mass, and strength, which makes sense because when we think about testosterone, we might think about the gym and muscles. So that's why the ovulatory phase, when you have the surges there, is going to be really helpful if you're in the gym and trying to PR or lift heavy and do things like that, or do endurance-based stuff. And then insulin is another really important one, and managing blood sugar is super important, especially if you have conditions like PCOS. So insulin is produced by the pancreas in response to glucose in the blood, so blood sugar. Anytime that you have any kind of carbs, it's going to break it down into glucose. If you aren't going to use that energy in that moment, it's going to store it. So that's what insulin is doing. So when it's out of balance, I feel like we know that there's issues with type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and things like that. So high blood sugar, low blood sugar, both of those are associated with menstrual issues, and they reduce fertility. So we want to make sure that we're balancing blood sugar. And then lastly, cortisol. I mentioned it earlier. Cortisol is our stress hormone, and that is released by the adrenals, again, which sit on top of our kidneys. Anytime that we're faced with any kind of stressor, which is happening all day long, even if you're not consciously aware of it, like you sitting in traffic, you scrolling on social media, you're constantly being triggered, and your brain is constantly having to take in all this stimulus and assess whether or not you're safe, whether or not this is a threat. So we're always activating that fight or flight response. So small doses are good. small doses lead to changes that get us that help us to adapt in a way that we come back bigger, stronger, better, faster, or whatever to handle that stressor again. So when we're in the gym, we're activating cortisol. We're increasing our heart rate. We're doing all these things. Our body doesn't know that we're in the gym. It just knows that we're stressed and we're under our fight or flight system. And so it's going to create adaptations like building more muscle mass or improving your endurance and your cardio and things like that. So that way, the next time you come to the gym, you can get better, right? Like that's really what's going on there. So, which is good. But when we're constantly under stress or we're chronically stressed because of our society and how things are and just all the stressors that are out there, and we're not managing self-care at all, then that is when we can have a lot of issues with like decreasing our progesterone levels, decreasing our sex drive, and causing more infertility issues. And then I just wanted to also include these two images here so that way you can see exactly when these hormones are rising and falling. And I like this one too here because you can see when some of these are being pulled more or increasing more during specific times. So like this purple one here, for example, that's progesterone. So when it's being pulled over in this direction, it's meaning that it's increasing in the luteal phase. Whereas this green one here is follicle stimulating hormone. That's really increasing during the ovulatory phase. So kind of cool to see that one. And then I also like this one as well because you can see all the hormone levels are pretty low when you're on your period. And then once you get into your follicular phase right after your period, you start to have an increase in all those hormones. Estrogen is rising here. And then right before ovulation is when you have that surge in follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And that's what initiates ovulation. And then you enter that phase. And then we see here all those hormones start to come down and progesterone is the one that starts to rise. So kind of nice to see that. And the reason I wanted to include these is because it's important to know when these hormones are rising and falling so you know what to do to support that. So that's going to be through nutrition. That's also going to be through managing stress. So that way you're not adding more stress to the body. And then I went over all of the phases in my podcast episode. So look at go check out the description. I'll have the show in the show notes of the podcast when I talked about each specific phase, but listen to the whole podcast because I think it was a really good discussion. So I won't go too much into detail about the follicular phase, but I will mention it's 7 to 10 days. This is when your follicular or when your cycle starts. So think of this as like a new start, fresh intentions. This is like our inner spring. Our stress levels are pretty low during this time and our metabolism is a little bit slower. So we may not have much of an appetite. And we might be able to have more capacity to add on more stress with exercise and things like that. So self-care is still important, but not as important compared to the other phases. In the ovulatory phase, this would be usually just 3 to 4 days. And that's when you would have the dramatic rise in estrogen and luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Our metabolism is still pretty slow. Our cortisol is still low. And so we, again, I think this is a really good time to be pushing yourself as much as you can. Like, I think you definitely can do that at any point in your cycle, but this is a time where you can really optimize off of that and it not affect you as much in a negative way, or you don't have to risk it affecting you in a negative way. So, things like cardio, high intensity training, or, just maxing out and pushing your PRs and things like that, especially long distance training, like that's a good time for those things. Luteinizing hormone would then be after. This is the longest phase. It's 10 to 14 days. So the first week, you might still have a lot of energy still kind of lingering from the ovulatory phase, but notice when you start to lose some of that energy a bit, that's because of progesterone increasing. So here we have our cortisol levels starting to rise and our metabolism is starting to increase. So that's why we start feeling a little bit more hungry. So make sure that you have regular balanced meals. That's going to be really important for balancing your blood sugar. And then with cortisol being high, I think we really want to focus on leaning more into self-care during this time. And that could look totally different for a lot of people. And I mentioned it earlier, but I think some people use exercise as the stress reliever, which is a great idea, but it's also a stressor itself. So it may not be the best thing. I think if you do feel like you want to be doing exercise, doing like in the gym and doing that kind of stuff, maybe focusing more on like mobility exercises. It doesn't always have to be about strength. Sometimes you got to work on your mobility and your stability and make sure that you have a good foundation for the times that you are able to leverage that energy that you have. So start there. And also with self-care, just really trying to take care of the body, especially if you did push yourself really hard in those first 2 phases. And then with the menstrual phase, obviously this is one that a lot of us are very familiar with already, but this is usually about 3 to 7 days. Metabolism is still going to be pretty fast, so continue to have regular balanced meals, exercise, really just trying to lean more into rest. The more that you allow yourself to rest during this time, the better your body is going to be able to respond to create positive adaptations in your follicular and your ovulatory phase. So I think stepping away and kind of taking your foot off the gas pedal is probably the hardest part with cycle syncing, because we're so conditioned to like the mentality that like you have to show up every day and no pain, no gain and all that. And you need to balance time for rest and restoration and taking it easy, giving yourself grace. Like, don't feel guilty about it. Allow yourself to have it. That time is just as valuable as the other times. So yoga, Pilates, walking, just some low volume stuff. And then with self-care too, maybe just continuing to have good quality sleep during all the phases, but really focusing a little bit more on that during this time. So maybe taking naps, maybe sleeping in a little bit longer, going to bed a little bit earlier, doing more breath work or meditations, a lot of stuff where you're going inward during this time. So the rest of this guide is just kind of some activities. So when I have this little uterus up here, it's just like an indication that this is kind of like an activity and something to think about. So here, I think just really taking your time with this, being patient with yourself, and not trying to take on too much too soon. So just follow these 5 strategies for when you're just getting started. First thing is just figure out where you're at in your cycle right now. Just build an awareness of where you're at. If you want to track, like count how many days you're on, you can do that. I really like using natural cycles, and I'll include in the description the code that I use that you could use for saving 20% off of their annual subscription. And I use natural cycles to track my cycle, my phases, and also fertility. So it predicts when you're likely to get pregnant based on where you're at in your cycle, which is helpful just to build that awareness. It's the only non-hormonal FDA approved form of birth control, which is great because I think there really aren't a lot of options, and it's great that we're able to kind of have an option that isn't focused on hormones and doesn't make some of these menstrual conditions worse for us, like cramps and bloating and stuff. And then ask yourself, what concerns do you have about your menstrual health that cycle syncing can protect against? So cramps, bloating, or if they're more severe conditions like endometriosis, fibroids, PCOS, things like that. Just first, even if you don't have, a concern, before you start thinking about like changing so many things in your life, just start with the vegetables, or start with one part of exercise. Just pick one thing to do and go from there. Notice how you feel. Document your symptoms and how they're changing and things that you're noticing. So before your period, or right before your menstrual phase, or in your late luteal phase, if you start to notice that you're getting PMS symptoms, use the table at the end of this guide to address those root issues. And we'll go through those because I think those are really helpful. And once you kind of feel good about like rotating your vegetables in, because I have a whole list of foods that you can look at for vegetables to rotate in. once you feel good with that, think about your cooking methods as well. So like your follicular and your ovulatory phase, which are your inner spring and your inner summer. Those are really good for cooler, fresher, more raw foods, especially the raw foods, because that's going to help to give you more fiber. When you have too much estrogen in the body, it goes into your intestines. And if you don't have fiber to push it out, it's just going to it's just going to stay in your system. I can't think of the word, but you know what I mean. So you want to get those out. You want to detox those basically. So raw foods with fiber are going to be really helpful for that during those 2 phases. In your luteal and your menstrual phase, this is your inner fall and your inner winter. So these are good for warmer, hot meals, foods that you would have during those times. So it's super easy to kind of think about cooking methods in that way. And then the next thing that you could try to do is seed cycling. So for your menstrual, follicular, and ovulatory phase, things like flax seeds and pumpkin seeds are really great for developing your estrogen. And then in your luteal phase, it's things like sesame or sunflower seeds can be really helpful for producing enough progesterone, especially if you have a lot of those PMS symptoms. So ease into it, pick a few things to focus on, notice those changes, make a plan, just build awareness of where you're at in your cycle and what some of these things are. I feel one of the things that I really enjoy about this, and one of the things that me and my sister talked about in the episode, is that as you're doing this, it's great because everything just feels natural. Like you don't feel like you're having to like follow any rules of a diet, you know, especially if you're somebody who's had a history of chronic dieting or yo-yo dieting, and it can be frustrating to do all these things and do all these changes and keep up with them and maintain them. And then when you fall off of that, you get discouraged and you feel like nothing's going to work for you. This is going to work for you because this is so natural. This is what our body needs. This is really the best way to maintain whatever goals you have and really optimize those goals too. So this is a really amazing table that I made, just breaking down each food group, what foods are really beneficial during that phase. So right now I'm in my menstrual phase, and I really like to do Buddha bowls or rice bowls. So I meal prepped wild rice, and then I just picked out like 2 or 3 vegetables from here that I wanted to roast. So I had sweet potatoes, and I didn't really want to do any others for that recipe. So I did, so I also have squash and broccoli. So it's not that you only can stick to these foods, but it's really nice like that you can look at specific foods that are really supportive of that phase that you're in. I got grapes, so that way I could like stack on those. So, you know, if I didn't have this list, it would be a little bit harder to figure some of those things out. So these are grains, vegetables, fruits, and legumes. And then also more on nuts and seeds, meats, seafood, and just like other like herbs or foods and things like that. And then obviously like that guide is great, but we also want to apply this to your life. And part of that is grocery shopping. So with grocery shopping, just try to follow, like, you know, first just figure out where are you in your cycle, and maybe predict to like where you're going to be, you know, at the end of the week too, you know, especially if you grocery shop for a week. If you're only going to be on your period for the day that you're grocery shopping, you don't want all of your meals to be for your menstrual phase. You also want to take into consideration that you're going to be transitioning into your follicular phase soon. So think about those. Review those lists of foods and figure out, you know, what you might be wanting to make, what you might, you know, plan out what you want your meals to look like, figure out what you also have at home. And then, you know, with planning out your meals, think about what foods are going to be more effective or easy for you to use. Is it frozen? Are they pre-cut? Are they already prepped? Like, is it a rotisserie chicken versus raw chicken? You know, things like that are going to make the meal prepping and planning part so much easier. And then this is a really nice little table that you can print out or use however you want to do exactly what I just said. So write, you know, if it's Sunday that you're going grocery shopping, then write what phase you're in and what you might be predicting to be in the, you know, moving forward into the week. And then just some ideas of like what you might want to have throughout your week. You know, if you want to meal prep your breakfast, maybe you do overnight oats, and for your like breakfast, you do with berries that are more appropriate for where you're at. So if I'm in my menstrual phase and maybe doing some blackberries and blueberries and things like that, or if I was in my follicular phase, maybe doing avocado toast or something on whole wheat bread. So just really use that list, plan out. Like, I think the biggest tip that I have for anybody is set yourself up for success. Even if this isn't the plan that you follow through with, writing it out and being intentional and taking the time to do this and think about it and plan for success is really, really important. Like, it's, even if, like I said, even if it's not what you end up doing, at least you took initiative and you're making a plan for yourself. And then if there's things that you need to pick up, you can write that down here and just like have it all nice and organized. And then last thing that I wanted to go through is just some of these common menstrual conditions. And the reason I wanted to include this is because I think our medical industry really tries to take a symptom focused approach. If you have acne, they give you topical treatments and things like that. Or if you have really bad cramps, they give you pain meds or they give you hormonal birth control, instead of trying to figure out like, what is the root cause of all of this? And that's what this is really breaking down for some of those common conditions. So I think with nutrition, you can really help to support developing support the hormones and making sure that they're in balance. So that way you don't have these things to worry about. So a common one, of course, is acne. That was one of my biggest ones. And my skin, it's very oily today, but it always is. I used to have very bad hormonal acne. Nothing that I did would work. And it got really worse once I got off of birth control. And that was really the reason why I got on birth control in the first place. And once I got off, it was even worse. So like it didn't make sense that hormonal birth control would be a solution, but that's what I was prescribed. And so with cycle syncing and just really supporting and preventing estrogen dominance, that's really helped to clear up my skin, obviously. And so, I mean, what causes acne? And it's really estrogen dominance, having too much estrogen. So we talked about it earlier, making sure that you have a lot of like fiber to get rid of all that extra estrogen in your system. Vitamin A, zinc, those are also very good for acne. And then try to avoid as well, especially during your luteal and your menstrual phase, things like dairy, soy, peanuts, vegetable oils, caffeine, gluten. All these cause systemic inflammation or inflammation in the body. Inflammation is stressful, so we don't want to add more stress. And then a couple of other ones are fibroids and breast tenderness. Fibroids are benign, non-cancerous tumors in the uterus, and this again is because of high estrogen. So again, we want to have enough fiber. A lot of these are very common things, and I think that's, like I said earlier, all this just becomes more natural, and it becomes a lot easier to do all these things. And a lot of them have the same root issue, and we shouldn't be treating them as separate things. So a lot of these are going to have the same kind of approach to improving those conditions. But flax seeds, unprocessed organic fermented soy, so tempeh, miso, those kinds of stuff, not processed soy products. We want to avoid those ones like soy cheese, soy meats, soy dairies. And then beans are also great because of their fiber and their protein, and of course, high fiber whole grains. If you have breast tenderness or you feel like your breasts just are more sore or sensitive, maybe right before your period in your late luteal phase, then that could be a sign of excess estrogen in your body. So things like vitamin E are really great. So you can get those from almonds, sunflower seeds, spinach, chard, kale, avocado, mango, kiwis. All those are great because of their antioxidants, and that helps to calm that inflammation. Primrose oil is also an anti-inflammatory. Things like caffeine and dairy, though, are pro-inflammatory, are going to cause more inflammation. So we want to avoid those. Cramps are another really big one, and bloating as well. And I feel like we are told as women that like it's just part of the package of having a period and being a woman, and that's not how it is. These aren't normal things. They aren't things that we have to suffer with. And when we're told that like, oh, it's just part of being a woman, we never really look for solutions. And so there is a solution, and it's nutrition. So what are cramps? So you have prostaglandins, which are hormone-like substances that cause your uterus to contract. That's the feeling of cramps. But there's 3 types of prostaglandins: PGE1, 2, and 3. PGE2 is the one that causes cramps. 1 and 3 are going to do the opposite, and they relax the uterine muscles. So we want to have things in our diet that promote more of the 1 and 3 and decrease PGE2. So a few days before your period, if you're somebody who is susceptible to cramps, or you just want to make sure that you don't have any cramps to worry about, take some vitamin E or sources that have vitamin E, like almonds or hazelnuts. Magnesium also is going to help to lower the PGE2, and that's going to be a lot of leafy greens. Linolenic acid is also great. So salmon, sardines, flax seeds. It's basically polyunsaturated fatty acids. So when you look at a food label, there's usually saturated fatty acids, trans fats, polyunsaturated, and monounsaturated. So the unsaturated ones are the ones that have the healthy fats that we want. Those are going to increase PGE1 and 3, which are going to promote more relaxation. Again, we want to avoid things that are going to cause more inflammation, so dairy, and also saturated animal fats, or anything like on a food label that says that it has a lot of saturated fats or trans fats as well. And then with bloating, that's just more fluid and sodium retention more than anything. That could be because of your gut microbiome. If you're taking hormonal birth control, that really messes with your gut microbiome. But there's a lot of other things that mess with it as well. So you actually have a colony of gut bacteria that help to digest estrogen, but if we're not taking care of that and promoting that colony, then it's not doing its job. It's not functioning to digest estrogen like it should. Chronic stress could be another one. So if you're not managing your stress, that could be another reason why you're bloated. And just like in general, nutrient deficiencies such as magnesium. So maybe taking a probiotic to support your microbiome. I take Athletic Greens. I know I see ads for it everywhere. And at first I was like, I don't want to take this thing. It has there's just so many ads. But I've taken it for over a year now, every single day. And it really is great. I never feel bloated. My stomach feels great. I never have stomach issues. So that's a really great one that I highly recommend. And it has probiotics as well and a lot of micronutrients. Magnesium supplements are also really great. That's going to help to promote relaxation of the muscles and ease constipation as well. I think I said 2 more last time, but these are the last 2. So endometriosis is it's a condition where the tissue inside of the uterus, which is your endometrium, starts to grow outside of your uterus. And that can be really painful because sometimes it could attach to other organs that are around that area, like your bladder or your intestine. And the reason for this is a lot of things. It could be something related to it being autoimmune or being triggered by chemical stress or excess estrogen. So really just focusing on anti-inflammation. So foods like leafy greens, broccoli, salmon, all those. Magnesium as well to reduce the pain and promote more relaxation. And then again, avoiding things that aren't going to cause more inflammation. Dairy, alcohol, gluten, pesticide-laden foods. So getting more organic foods and red meats can be pretty inflammatory. And then the last one, PCOS, which affects about 5 million women. So super precedent. PCOS is associated with ovaries on the cyst, but that's not always the case. And the thing about PCOS as well is that it can set you up for insulin resistance, and that could be a whole other challenge and barrier to living a healthy life when you have issues with balancing your blood sugar. And this is typically due to high androgens, which are male hormones like testosterone. So that's why women sometimes with PCOS have maybe more like facial hair, or they're growing hair in places that like men normally would, because they have a lot more testosterone. So, and they also maybe have low progesterone levels. So they might have really bad PMS symptoms as well. So foods that are going to be high in fiber to get rid of extra estrogen or get rid of any extra hormones that we don't need, because testosterone is also going to be able to be eliminated if there's too much in the system. So high fiber foods, It's also going to combat that insulin resistance. And then again, avoiding those things like caffeine, sugar, dairy, red meats, artificial sweeteners, soy products, especially if they're processed, cooking oils, and margarine. So if you have any of those conditions, hopefully this is a good place for you to start, and some good examples of things to incorporate. But go back to the grocery list as well, and maybe just plan it out in a way that, is sustainable, and you're taking 1 or 2 small steps and not trying to take on too much too soon. And then I just also wanted to include here a little bit about hormonal birth control, because a lot of women, like I said earlier, are prescribed hormonal birth control maybe as a treatment for some of these symptoms that they have, and that's really only just putting a Band-Aid on treating those things instead of looking at the root cause. So one thing also that I feel like people don't understand, or maybe aren't aware of, is that if you're taking hormonal birth control, like the pill, or you have an IUD, you are getting a steady stream of synthetic hormones, and that doesn't allow for your body to have like that natural rise and fall throughout the 28 days of your cycle. And so you never ovulate. If you never ovulate, you never actually have a period. And there is that placebo week of pills in when you take the pill. And the only reason that was created is so that women would feel more comfortable with taking this medication, because it would feel more natural because you're bleeding. But that bleed is not a period, because you never ovulate and you never therefore have a cycle. So it's kind of crazy to think about, because I feel like a lot of people, like I was on it for years, since I was 15, and I got off of it like 2 years ago when I was 22. So not, everyone's journey is going to look a little bit different. And if you're somebody who is currently taking hormonal birth control, or you've gotten off of it, or you're thinking about getting off of it, understand that there are going to be symptoms of getting off of it as well. But following the cycle syncing guide can be a really great place for you to start, so you can prevent a lot of really bad side effects, like how I didn't gain a lot of weight, but I was at my heaviest weight. And I was just really tired. I had really bad hormonal acne. It was just not good side effects. So learning how to live cyclically with my cycle has been really helpful. One of the ways that I do that is by using natural cycles. So you can go to this link here. You can also go to their website and use Adrian to save 20% off. If you want to use other apps, you can just use your health app to track when you start your period. Like, that's a good place to start as well. You may not know exactly when you're going into your luteal phase and ovulatory phase and all that. The reason Natural Cycles works really well is because you take your temperature every morning, and that really helps it takes your temperature every morning, and it creates an algorithm based on all of your temperatures to predict where you're at. Because throughout those phases, your body temperature changes. So that's why warmer foods are better in the luteal and menstrual phase, and cooler foods are better in the follicular and ovulatory phase. And then one other thing that you could do is also taking LH test strips, and that's going to measure the luteinizing hormone that increases when you ovulate. So obviously when that is positive, you're ovulating. So you can kind of use that to see where you're at in that phase, and then you would know when you're in your follicular and your luteal, and then obviously your menstrual because you're bleeding. So if you want to learn more, go check out the podcast episode on Apple and Spotify. It's called Anything Flows. It is episode 4 where we talk about cycle syncing, but the other episodes are really great as well. Follow me on Instagram too. This is where I post a lot of my content for cycle syncing, recipes, or just share also like my journey and my experience with cycle syncing and health coaching in general, all the things that I do outside of cycle syncing. And then if you want to contact me about coaching and or if you have any questions, you can email me at adriannoriegovellness@gmail.com. You can also visit my website. That's healthcoachadrian.com. And you can look at some of the information on there as well. And then my YouTube channel where I'll be posting this video. And then I have some videos from years ago too that when I first started getting into being a health coach. I don't even think I was a health coach at that time. I was a health educator for the health department. So kind of similar, but like it's nice to see like the growth that I've had and like where I'm at now, and this is where I'm like meant to be and like what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I'm just really happy to be able to share all this information and support women to do this, because I would not be doing anything differently. This is something that's only improved my life and only created more balance and more sustainability. And I don't ever feel like I have to follow any rules or do anything specific. I'm literally just doing what I can to support my body the best way that I can. So reach out if you have any questions. Let me know what you guys think. Like the video, share it, comment, and hopefully soon I'll have another one out for y'all.